This video was produced using artificial intelligence for educational and documentary purposes.
On April 15, 1912, the Titanic sank in the North Atlantic. But that night, it wasn't just a ship that was lost. John Jacob Astor, Isidor Straus, and Benjamin Guggenheim, three of the wealthiest and most influential men of their era, vanished together on the same voyage in the same early hours of the morning. Just over a year later, the global financial system would enter a new phase, a historical coincidence or a context rarely questioned. Before we follow this timeline further, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from, so we can continue this investigation together. Between 1910 and 1912, the financial world lived under quiet tension. John Jacob Astor, Isidor Straus, and Benjamin Guggenheim moved through private clubs, offices, and formal dinners where one theme kept returning: instability. Recent banking crises still echoed through decision-making, and trust in the system was far from absolute. Newspapers spoke of collapses narrowly avoided and the growing need for stronger financial controls. For men like John, Isidor, and Benjamin, this was not a time of comfort, but of careful observation. The economic backdrop was already shifting when the Titanic's voyage began to take shape. The panic of 1907 remained fresh in the minds of those at the top of the economy. John followed the headlines closely, aware of how banks had fallen in a matter of days. Isidor stayed in constant contact with managers and administrators, weighing risk and stability. Benjamin watched negotiations and capital flows with caution, alert to signs of weakness. Confidence in the system had been shaken, and improvised solutions no longer seemed enough. That recent crisis quietly shaped decisions as the world moved toward 1912. As the decade progressed, debate over control of the banking system gained momentum. John moved within circles discussing the need for national financial coordination. Isidor followed political conversations centered on stability, credit, and public trust. Benjamin observed discreet meetings where bankers and industrialists studied models adopted abroad. There was no consensus, only the shared sense that the existing system had clear limits. As these discussions intensified, key decisions began forming far from public view. When the Titanic was announced, it was more than transportation. For John, Isidor, and Benjamin, the ship symbolized power, status, and faith in industrial progress. First class brought together economic, political, and industrial leaders in a single floating space. Being seen on board meant belonging to the most exclusive circle of the North Atlantic. The Titanic became a showcase for an era that believed risk had been mastered. It was within this environment that the three would embark, surrounded by prestige and confidence. John was more than an heir. His wealth, social influence, and public presence placed him among the most closely watched men of his generation. In exclusive circles, his decisions carried weight. Isidor and Benjamin stood nearby as pillars of the economic elite, but John often drew the center of attention. His name symbolized stability in a time of growing uncertainty. Isidor was known for the respect he had earned through commerce and for his dignified public image. His presence in first-class spaces conveyed calm and reliability. In social and institutional gatherings, his voice was heard carefully. John and Benjamin stood alongside him as peers, but Isidor stood out for his quiet authority in a world sensitive to reputation. Benjamin represented industrial capital tied to global networks of extraction and investment. His focus remained on raw material flows, international agreements, and long-term stability. As he quietly observed markets and negotiations, John and Isidor operated alongside him at the same economic summit. Three distinct profiles moving within a system in transition. The presence of John, Isidor, and Benjamin on the same ship was unusual, but not impossible. Transatlantic elites often shared routes, seasons, and exclusive spaces. Still, the fact that all three were aboard the same vessel at the same historical moment stands out. Three central figures of economic power crossing the Atlantic together. On board, daily life remained comfortable despite external signs. Temperatures dropped, and ice warnings circulated among the crew. John reviewed notes and schedules with quiet focus. Isidor sensed the harsher conditions but remained composed. Benjamin watched the surroundings without concern. Luxury stayed intact while risk was treated as a distant detail. As the Titanic moved across the Atlantic, the financial world continued to shift. John, Isidor, and Benjamin stood at the top of a system already discussing profound change. Nothing felt urgent on board, yet beyond the ship, decisions were still taking shape. If this timeline interests you, subscribe and follow the investigation to the end. Ice warnings increased as the Titanic maintained speed. Confidence in procedures remained high, and operational adjustments stayed discreet. John, Isidor, and Benjamin appeared in lounges and on deck, observing without intervening. To them, the situation seemed under control. The ship pressed forward, supported by certainty rather than doubt. The impact shattered routine with a sudden, blunt shock. The Titanic slowed as the crew reacted quickly. John responded practically, trying to understand what had changed. Isidor remained calm, watching those around him. Benjamin showed complete composure, reading the signs before reacting. The ship had been struck, but the danger was not yet clear. As evacuation began, order mixed with hesitation. Unspoken class rules still shaped decisions around the lifeboats. John moved with practical intent, helping organize space. Isidor observed quietly, respecting established priorities. Benjamin stayed composed, attentive to the collective mood. The situation evolved, though its full gravity was not yet understood.
Clear the gangway! Everyone back! Keep moving! Only women and children!
In the final phase of the night, John ensured his wife's safety before making any other choice. After watching her board, he remained on deck, fully aware of the rules being enforced. Tall, easily recognized by his mustache and dark suit, he did not attempt to advance. His posture reflected acceptance as time ran out. During the final stage of evacuation, Isidor refused a seat in the lifeboat. Standing beside his wife, he remained on deck as others were guided away. His manner was calm, without visible hesitation. Recognizable by his gray beard and glasses, Isidor accepted the rules of that night. The decision was silent, firm, and widely observed. In the final moments, Benjamin maintained a posture that drew attention. Dressed formally, he showed control and composure as the deck emptied. The thin mustache, cufflinks, and tuxedo matched eyewitness accounts. Benjamin showed no urgency, only quiet acceptance of what lay ahead. The sinking entered its final stage. The deck tilted, lights failed, and time ran short. John, Isidor, and Benjamin remained in different areas of the ship, visible among the few still aboard. Each held to his characteristic demeanor as the structure gave way. The Titanic ceased to be a setting and became a ruin. The lifeboats drifted away in silence. Only the sound of oars cut through the freezing water. In the distance, the Titanic stayed lit for a few final moments before darkness took over. John, Isidor, and Benjamin were no longer visible. Cold, darkness, and emptiness replaced where three central figures had stood. With rescue underway, the lists began. Names were read, written, and checked in shock and silence. John, Isidor, and Benjamin appeared repeatedly on papers and headlines, always without confirmation of return. Absence became official. This was no longer a night at sea, but a historical record defined by who did not come back. Mourning spread quickly. Funerals, tributes, and ceremonies gathered elites and public figures. Portraits of John, Isidor, and Benjamin circulated through newspapers and halls, now symbols of collective loss. Their names came to represent not only lives cut short, but the social impact left by the disappearance of three central figures. Investigations sought objective answers. Excessive speed, ignored warnings, communication failures, and technical limits were examined in detail. The sinking was explained through human decisions and operational conditions. Official reports closed the case, yet the broader context of the era remained outside the mainframe. As the initial shock faded, the financial agenda moved forward. Reforms, proposals, and debates returned to power circles. The absence of John, Isidor, and Benjamin was felt in the same rooms they once occupied, not as direct cause, but as a noticeable void in that historical moment. The system moved on, without three of its most recognizable faces. In 1913, a new financial landscape took shape in the United States. The creation of a centralized system aimed to address recurring crises and recent instability. Newspapers recorded the change as an institutional turning point. John, Isidor, and Benjamin now belong to the past, mentioned only as references to an era that had ended. When events are placed in sequence, certain coincidences stand out. Three influential figures vanish on the same night. Soon after, a structural shift reshapes the financial system. In the same period, a powerful figure cancels his own voyage. Individually, these are historical facts. Together, they invite careful observation. Not every historical question has a clear answer. Archives disappear, contexts are simplified, and some connections rarely enter traditional documentaries, not because of hidden proof, but because of limits in scope and approach. What remains outside the frame also shapes collective memory. Between confirmed facts, silent zones persist without direct explanation. In the end, only facts and context remain. Three influential figures on the same ship at the same moment in history disappear. Shortly after, the financial world enters a new phase, a historical coincidence or a reflection of a period of profound change. History does not answer that alone. What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments.